Hello, I'm Rebekah Ricks. I'm here with The Brew. And a brew is a mixture of people, events, or things that come together to form a more potent whole. And we want to make your whole a whole lot better. And today we're going to be talking about algebra, tips and tricks. I know. So sometimes when we say algebra, I almost feel like saying algebra, dun, 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 and making it super dramatic, because I know to a lot of kids and parents, algebra is very, very dramatic. So let me take a sip of my coffee here, and then we'll go into talking about algebra. So let me preface this. With this thing right here. Algebra is one of my favorite things. I know, true confessions. Algebra is one of my favorite things in the world. I love algebra. One of my favorite things to teach is Algebra 2. I love teaching Algebra 2. I know, don't judge me because I'm that person. But I am, we could call that, I'm kind of mathy. So I like math. I enjoy math. I get math. Math to me is always the same. It doesn't change. It's always exactly the same. So a lot of times though, we get into math and we have students that struggle in math. And typically a student that struggles in math has usually struggled in math for a while. And then all of a sudden we get into algebra and it's a whole new world. So maybe you have someone who's getting ready to go into algebra, or someone that's in algebra that's struggling with it. So let's talk about a couple things, how to get your student ready for algebra, how to get your child ready. And so when they hear algebra, they don't hear the dun dun dun. Now, let me preface too that algebra is one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it. Okay, so obviously as a math teacher, I use math every day. I've had that experience and I see it and use it and do it over and over again. So it becomes to me. Let me also say another math myth is people who are really good at math. Let me preface this by saying this doesn't apply to everyone, but it does. Not everyone who knows Spanish can teach Spanish. Okay, not everyone who knows math can teach math. Just because you're really good at math doesn't mean that you can teach math. Okay, here's a good example. So I have a degree in advanced math, and my husband has a computer engineering degree, and he took almost more math than I did. He had to take differential equations, and he took like 3 calculuses. He took a ton of math. If I asked him to explain math problems to me, he can't. We've talked about this a long time. He's a programmer. He's been a programmer for a million years, and I always ask him to teach a programming class. No, he says he doesn't teach. He's not a good teacher. So I guess if you kind of think about it like that, not everyone, that teaching is a gift that we have. It's a special gift that some people can do. So remember, just because you meet someone who can speak Spanish, not all Spanish speakers can teach Spanish. Not everyone who's good at math can teach math. So if you kind of think of it that way, it will kind of help you too, because you have to find someone who's got a good balance to be able to teach it. Now, when you're going into algebra, think about it this way. There's a couple bases you have to have, okay? If you don't have these things, they're building blocks, they're your foundation. So a lot of times it's like building a house of cards. We're trying to build this house of cards. We're trying to build it and make it sturdy, and it's like cards. It'll fall over in a second, because it'll collapse on itself because we don't have a good, strong foundation. And the number one foundation for me for algebra is multiplication tables. Okay, if you don't know your multiplication tables, you're going to struggle. Okay, did you hear that? If you don't know your multiplication tables, you're usually going to struggle in math. So the number one thing that you need to know is multiplication tables and positive and negative numbers. Now, sometimes for some reason, positive and negative numbers are hard for people to grasp. I don't know why, but it is hard, especially when you're adding and subtracting. So before you really get into some of that hard stuff, that's why we have pre-algebra, so we can learn those positive and negative numbers. As you move on through Algebra 1 to go on to Algebra 2, the big thing you need that you will have to know for the rest of your math career is how to factor. And so if you don't know how to factor at the end of Algebra 1, you can't go on to Algebra 2 if you don't know how to factor. You just can't. You can't go on to pre-calculus. You can't go on to discrete math. You can't go on further in your math career if you don't know how to factor in Algebra 1. So it's kind of like even before you go into algebra, you really need to know those multiplication tables. So my number one favorite thing in the whole world, which I love for math, for multiplication, is something called times tables. And I know it might be a little young, but I've used it for high schoolers, and it'll change your life. So what I found usually is most kids coming into algebra, depending on where they're from. So if you're coming from public school, and honestly, it really doesn't matter if you're coming from public school or a private school or you're homeschooled. It kind of depends on the teacher you had for the year before. And so I've noticed more and more, judgy eyes for some people, more and more that kids have become calculator dependent. So here's the good and the bad of calculator dependent. All right, if you're calculator dependent, you can't think of the higher order skills that you need for algebra. So we're talking about longer steps in problems. So algebra is very much about steps. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do this. Step 3, you do this. And if you do step 1, step 2, step 3, it's always going to make the right answer. Okay, it's like a recipe. Everything in algebra is a recipe. So if you look at algebra, or you're teaching algebra, or you're helping a child through algebra, think of it as steps. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do this. Step 3, you do this. Step 4, you do this. Okay, so I always, when I teach algebra, make up some sort of story. So in times tables, the preface of times tables is there's a story for each multiplication table, and it helps you remember the multiplication table. So if you've ever been in any of my math classes, any of my algebra classes, I have my factoring stories, okay? So for factoring, we have a story about dating, the dating story. The first thing is you break them apart because you have to break it into two things. And then what happens after, because there's always somebody that's a lot of drama, and the number in the middle, because when you factor you have 3, the number in the middle is somebody that's always in the middle of drama. And what does that people need to do? They need to break up. So you got to break up your numbers, and then because they're lonely, you got to find a perfect pair for both of them. And so I could go through the whole thing and tell you how I do it, and then at the end they do find a perfect match, but it has to exactly match for them to go. We do that, and then at the end, what's right good on the outside isn't always what's on the outside doesn't always reflect what's on the inside. So make sure your outside matches your inside. So I go through steps. I make a story. And kind of every class, I make up different stories for each one. The dating story for factory has pretty much stayed forever. But I can break up the other things I make stories for. And it really depends on the class. So for every single thing, if you're teaching it, or you're helping your student, or you're looking at it, the number one thing is to break it into steps, like a recipe. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Break your math problems into steps. The second thing I like to do is make a story so you can remember the steps. Third thing is there's 2 different ways to teach math, okay? There's 2 different philosophies of math teaching. There's what we call a spiral review. So in a spiral review, you teach a concept, and then you do like 10 problems of that concept. And then you review all the other concepts you've done. So you spiral through all these concepts you've done every day, and eventually you learn it. Then there's something called a building blocks. Okay, when you do building blocks, it means you do, I know, and kids hate this, 30 problems, okay? So the premise is 30. If you do 30 of one thing, you can do it. You know how to do it. You'll have it memorized. So don't hate me, kids. Don't hate me. I'm a fan of building blocks. Sometimes I think the biggest problem in a lot of math programs is they don't do enough practice. So in order to practice it, that means doing 30 of one type of problem. So I know it's not super duper fun. This isn't a super fun tip maybe for some people, but it is a truth tip. Let's tell the truth tip. The more times you practice something, the better you get. So I kind of equate it to sports. So I'm kind of a big sports fan. Go Sooners. Someone that's at sports, they spend hours at football practice. Why? So that they can be good at it. Well, the more you practice something, the better you become. And I know that a lot of math homework sucks your will to live, but a whole batch of 30 of one type of problem, if you do that, then you're going to know how to do that problem. You're going to remember. And then a small spiral review. So 10, 12 problems a review from before. So the big thing is practice. Practice makes perfect, especially in math. So teach a concept, and I usually try to do about 15 in class, and then they do 15 for homework. They've taken that concept, they've repeated that concept several times, and then we're moving on to something, learning it. So I guess my 3 biggest tips from teaching math is steps. Make sure you have steps for everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, write down steps. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do this. Step 3, you do this. Number 2, practice, practice, practice. Do a block of problems. 30 is the technical number that we want to do. The number that the experts say is perfect, and I'm kind of leaning toward 30. The more practice you do. And then with your steps, make your steps fun. Think of something obscure and off the wall for everything you do. So almost all my, I don't know why, but almost all my stories have to do with aliens or a superhero or something crazy. We're always being attacked by aliens in math, and here's how we're going to save the world. Because step 1, we have to do this, and step 2, we do this. And so make up some sort of crazy story. And then step 4, to make it more fun, do some sort of really, really, really crazy fun rewards for math. Okay, so I'm a big believer in popsicle parties or pickle parties or something really fun and crazy that's going to help them remember what it is you're teaching. Because, who doesn't want a reward for it? I was talking, I had this group of stickers. Someone just talked to me about it the other day, and I had completely forgotten. And apparently I had this pack of stickers, smiley face stickers, that they worked really hard, but we thought that the smiley faces looked kind of angry, and we called them evil smiley faces. And this was for, I think it was probably high school, something I taught in high school, because the students said, "Do you still have evil smiley face stickers?" And I thought, oh my goodness, I forgot. But that was my reward. If you got so many right in a row, you got a smiley face sticker. And there's some really good math problems. One of them is IXL if you're looking for extra practice. And the point of IXL is you have to do 5 in a row right to be able to go on to the next concept. So the biggest thing is practice, practice, practice. Before you go into algebra, if you are in the summer before algebra, go do some multiplication tables, learn your positive and negative numbers, and you're set to go. Remember, slow and steady wins the race, okay? Rome wasn't built in a day. So algebra, you have to go back and build those foundations. Go slow, learn what you're doing, keep it very, very organized and very well. And, the more you do, the more you practice, the better you get. So hopefully that was a little bit of help. I know it was one of my favorite subjects is talking about algebra, and I know I went a little long, and I could sit here and talk about tricks and tips for algebra all night because that's my passion. I enjoy that. That's one of the things I love doing is algebra, but hopefully that'll help you a little bit. If you're looking for more specific questions on a specific concept, then maybe if you leave a comment or a question in the comments, I'll make sure I get back to you and help you with those specific things. If you're looking for a specific program that works or a curriculum that you like or that I like, or you have one that you love that you've done through algebra and has helped you, let me know. So don't forget, as you take your last brew of the day, I know I've been drinking coffee all day long, but as you take your last brew, remember you are not alone in your schooling endeavors, and we are here to help you. I'll see you all Friday morning for our special extra shot of espresso. Y'all have a great night.